The sound of a sledgehammer hitting drywall felt less like home renovation and more like a physical blow to my chest, especially since I had built this house with my own 2 hands. I stood frozen at the entrance of the sunroom, watching a stranger tear through the wall my late wife Elena had loved, but the true devastation wasn't the dust coating the mahogany floorboards. It was seeing Monica, my daughter-in-law, standing amidst the debris and tossing Elena's unfinished watercolor into a heavy-duty trash bag as if it were nothing more than kitchen waste. When the canvas crunched under the weight of the debris, she simply smiled that tight, condescending smile and said, "Oh good, Thomas, you're awake to see us finally clearing out this creepy junk room." My son Jason stood behind her, refusing to meet my eyes, while the rage in my throat tasted like ash. I didn't scream, and I didn't fight. I simply reached into my pocket, snapped a silent photo of the painting in the garbage, and remembered the specific eviction clause Elena had hidden in the trust for this exact moment. Monica thought she was breaking me, but she had just pulled the pin on a grenade she didn't even know she was holding. The contractor, a young man with drywall dust caught in his beard, hesitated for a moment as he saw me standing there in my bathrobe. He lowered the crowbar, his eyes darting between the grieving widower in the doorway and the woman who was signing his checks, clearly sensing the heavy, suffocating tension that had just filled the room. He looked like he wanted to apologize, or perhaps ask if he should stop, but Monica clapped her hands sharply, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the space where Elena used to play classical music while she painted. "We are paying by the hour, Mike," she said, her voice cutting through the dust clouds with practiced authority. "Rip it all out. We need the framing done by Friday if we want the playroom ready for the twins' birthday. Thomas understands, don't you, Thomas?" She didn't wait for an answer, turning her back on me to inspect a swatch of aggressively bright yellow paint she had taped to the wall, a color that looked violent against the soft, natural hues Elena had chosen 20 years ago. My son finally looked up from his phone, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, his posture slouching in a way that always betrayed his guilt. "Dad, look," Jason started, his voice a low mumble that barely carried over the sound of the contractor resuming his work. "Don't give us that look. It's just a room. Mom's been gone for 3 years. It's morbid to keep it like a shrine. We need the space for the kids. You want your grandkids to be happy, right?" It was the same weaponized question they had used to move in 3 months ago, the same question they used to take the master bedroom, and the same question they used to convince me to sell my truck. Do it for the family. Do it for the kids. They wielded my love for my grandchildren like a cudgel, beating me into submission with the implication that if I said no, I was a selfish, bitter old man. That I looked at Jason, a boy I had taught to ride a bike on this very driveway, a man who was now watching his wife erase his mother's existence without offering a single word of protest. The anger inside me wanted to roar. I wanted to tell him that I had poured the foundation of this room myself, that Elena and I had hand-picked every beam of timber, and that the creepy junk Monica was throwing away was worth more than her entire wardrobe. But I forced my face into a mask of calm, resigned senility. "I suppose you're right, Jason," I said, my voice quiet and steady, watching his shoulders relax instantly. "The twins do need space. I'll just get out of your way." "Thank you," Monica chirped, not even looking around. "And Thomas, try to stay in your room while the crew is moving debris through the hall. We don't want you tripping and breaking a hip. We really don't have time for a hospital run today." I nodded slowly, turned on my heel, and walked away from the sound of splintering wood. Every step down the hallway was a lesson in discipline. I walked past the living room, where my vintage leather armchair had been replaced by a white sectional that I wasn't allowed to sit on with shoes, and past the dining room where Elena's china cabinet had been sold on a marketplace app while I was at a doctor's appointment, that I entered the small guest bedroom at the back of the house, the room they had graciously allowed me to occupy in my own home. It was cramped, filled with the few boxes of personal belongings I had managed to salvage from their purge, but it had the one thing they didn't know about. Inside the closet, hidden behind a row of my old winter coats, was a small, fireproof wall safe I had installed years ago. That I locked the bedroom door, verified that the heavy noise of demolition was still echoing from the other side of the house, and knelt on the floor. My hands, usually steady, trembled slightly as I spun the dial. Left to 10. Right to 24. Left to 55. The date of our anniversary. The safe clicked open. Inside lay a single, thick leather binder stamped with the logo of Henderson and Associates. I pulled it out and sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed, opening it to the section marked the Harmony Trust, Conditions of Residency. Elena had been a brilliant contract lawyer, a woman who understood human nature better than anyone I had ever met. She had loved Jason, but she saw him clearly. She knew he was weak, and she knew Monica was ambitious. 3 months before she died, she sat me down and said, "Thomas, you are too kind for your own good. When I'm gone, they will try to walk over you. This isn't just a will, it's a shield." I flipped to page 14, my finger tracing the paragraph I had memorized but needed to see again to calm my racing heart. Clause 7b, the preservation of core structure. The grantor, Thomas, retains a life estate in the property. The beneficiaries, Jason and family, are granted tenancy solely at the pleasure of the grantor. Any structural alteration to the sanctuary wing, art studio, without the express written consent of the grantor, or any act that causes undue distress to the grantor as determined by the trustee, constitutes an immediate breach of tenancy. That I looked at the phone in my hand, at the photo of the crushed watercolor painting in the black trash bag. Undue distress. It was a legal term, often hard to prove, but combined with the unauthorized demolition of a protected wing, it was a nuclear launch code. They hadn't just renovated a room, they had triggered a clause that revoked their right to live under this roof. I closed the folder, a strange sense of cold peace settling over me. They had 12 hours. I would let them finish tearing down the wall. I would let them think they had won. And tomorrow, when the dust settled, they would learn that while they might occupy the house, the ghost of Elena still owned it. It hadn't started with sledgehammers and trash bags, nor had it begun with shouting matches or eviction notices. The invasion of my home had started 3 months ago with a pan of homemade lasagna and a conversation about loneliness that was so carefully scripted I didn't realize I was reading lines until the final curtain. I sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed in the guest room, listening to the muffled thuds of demolition down the hall, and allowed my mind to drift back to that Sunday afternoon when the trap was first set. Jason and Monica had come over for dinner, something they rarely did unless they needed a babysitter or a short-term loan, but that night was different. They brought wine, they brought dessert, and they brought an overwhelming amount of concern for my declining state. We were sitting at the mahogany dining table, the one Monica would later cover with a cheap plastic tablecloth because she didn't want the kids scratching it, when she reached across the centerpiece to hold my hand. Her skin was cool, her grip firm, and her eyes shimmered with a wetness that I now recognize as a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Thomas," she had said, her voice dropping to a whisper that forced me to lean in. "We're worried about you. Jason and we can't sleep at night thinking about you all alone in this massive house. It's too much for one person. It's lonely, and frankly, it's dangerous." I had tried to protest, telling them that I was perfectly capable of managing the stairs and that the silence of the house was actually a comfort to me because it was where I felt closest to Elena. But they were ready for that argument. Jason had chimed in then, looking at his plate as he spoke, spinning a narrative about how the twins, Leo and Mia, were forgetting who their grandfather was because they saw me so little. He mentioned the rising cost of living, their struggle to save for a house of their own, and how beautiful it would be to have a multi-generational home where we could all support each other. "Think of the kids, Dad," Jason had said, finally looking up with eyes that mirrored his mother's. "They need you. And maybe we need you too." That was the dagger. They knew that while I could endure loneliness, I could not endure the idea of being useless to my family. So I agreed. I told them they could move in for a year to save money, a temporary arrangement to help them get on their feet. I thought I was opening my door to family. I didn't know I was unlocking the gates for a hostile takeover. The transition from guest to owner happened so subtly that I didn't notice the ground shifting until I was already falling. The first week they arrived, the moving truck blocked the driveway for 3 days. I went out to help Jason carry boxes, expecting to guide them to the 2 spacious guest rooms on the 2nd floor, but Monica stopped me at the bottom of the stairs, holding a blueprint she had drawn up on her iPad. "Thomas, we've been thinking," she said, blocking my path with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The twins are loud. They wake up at dawn, they run around, and they cry. If we take the upstairs guest rooms, you'll never get a moment of peace. Plus, with your bad knee, wouldn't it be better if you were on the ground floor?" It sounded logical, almost considerate, until I realized what she was actually suggesting. The only bedroom on the ground floor was the small study I had converted into a guest room for visiting relatives. It was cramped, dark, and right next to the noisy laundry room. "But the master bedroom is on the ground floor," I had pointed out, confused. "I sleep there." Monica had laughed, a light, tinkling sound that made me feel foolish for even speaking. "Oh, Thomas, be practical. The master suite has the connecting nursery room and the large bath. It's the only space that fits a family of 4. Surely you don't need a king-sized bed and a walk-in closet for just yourself. It's wasted space. Besides, sleeping in the room you shared with Elena isn't that just prolonging your grief?" She had said it so casually, framing my displacement as a therapeutic necessity. I looked at Jason, waiting for him to defend his father, to say that a man shouldn't be kicked out of his own bed in the house he built. But Jason just shrugged, muttering something about how much easier it would be for Monica to handle the kids if they had the extra space. Defeated by their united front and too tired to fight a war over square footage, I had relented. I packed 30 years of clothing into 3 cardboard boxes and moved into the small back room. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress of the twin bed, staring at a ceiling fan that wobbled, I heard them laughing in the master suite. I heard the sound of my heavy oak dresser being dragged across the floor to make room for their modern IKEA furniture. They hadn't just moved in, they had colonized the house. Over the next few weeks, my presence was slowly erased from the common areas. My reading glasses were swept into drawers because they cluttered the counters. My collection of architectural digests was moved to the garage because paper attracts dust. Every time I walked into the kitchen to make coffee, Monica would be there, sighing loudly as she reorganized the pantry, asking me why I bought such cheap brands, or telling me that I was in the way of her meal prep. That I became a ghost in my own hallways, drifting between the small guest room and the backyard, avoiding the spaces I used to rule. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was for the grandkids. But as I sat there in the present day, listening to the contractor rip apart the last sanctuary I had left, Elena's art studio, I realized that the temporary arrangement was never meant to end. They were never going to leave. They were waiting for me to die, and until I did, they were going to make sure I knew exactly how little space I was allowed to occupy in their world. Once the bedroom was conquered, the rest of the house fell with alarming speed, transforming from a home filled with 30 years of warm memories into a sterile showroom for a minimalist catalog. I watched it happen from the periphery, acting the part of the doting grandfather who was just happy to be included, even as my heart broke a little more with every modification. Monica called it modernizing, a word she used like a weapon to justify stripping away every ounce of character Elena and I had cultivated. That it started with the paint, specifically in the living room where Elena had chosen a soft, buttery yellow that caught the afternoon sun and made the whole space feel like a warm embrace. I came home from a walk to the park one Tuesday to find the furniture pushed to the center of the room and drop cloths covering the hardwood floors. Monica was standing on a ladder, a roller in her hand, covering the yellow with a color she proudly called Revere Pewter, which to my eyes looked exactly like the color of wet sidewalk cement. "Oh, you're back," she said, glancing down at me without stopping her work. "Don't look so shocked, Thomas. That yellow was dreadfully dated. It made the house look like a nursing home. This gray is much more sophisticated, don't you think? It increases the resale value, too." I wanted to tell her that I wasn't selling, that I would never sell, and that the yellow was the exact shade of the sunflowers Elena had carried in her wedding bouquet. But I saw Jason standing by the window, taping off the trim, looking anxious as he waited for my reaction. If I fought them on the paint, they would label me as difficult, rigid, and senile. They would use it as ammunition to marginalize me further. So, I forced my facial muscles into a compliant, passive expression. "It's certainly different," I said, leaning on my cane a little more heavily than I needed to. "Very clean. If you think it's best, Monica, then I'm sure it is." She beamed, not at me, but at the wall, validated in her belief that she was the savior of this run-down property. "Exactly. Glad you're being reasonable about this. Some older people get so attached to ugly things just because they've been there forever." The ugly things she referred to were next on the chopping block. 2 days later, I walked into the living room to find my leather recliner missing. It was a sturdy, well-worn chair that molded perfectly to my back, the place where I had read thousands of bedtime stories to Jason and where I had sat holding Elena's hand during those final, difficult months. In its place stood a stiff, low-backed armchair with spindly wooden legs and fabric that felt like burlap. "Where is my chair?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to remain calm. Jason looked up from his tablet, guilt flashing across his face before he masked it with annoyance. "We put it in the garage, Dad. It was falling apart." The leather was cracked, and honestly, it smelled like old man. "This new one fits the aesthetic much better. It's mid-century modern." "I can't sleep in this," I said, sitting tentatively on the hard cushion. "It has no neck support." "You have a bed for sleeping, Thomas," Monica interjected from the kitchen, not even bothering to come into the room. "The living room is for entertaining, not for napping. We're having the Hendersons over next week, and I won't have that monstrosity ruining the flow of the room." I went to the garage later that night, finding my chair shoved into a damp corner behind the lawnmower, covered in a layer of dust. I sat in it for an hour in the darkness, smelling the faint scent of Elena's perfume that still lingered in the leather, and whispered a promise that this wasn't the end. I left the chair there, knowing that bringing it back inside would only provoke a war I wasn't ready to fight yet, but the final straw, the act that truly cemented my resolve to destroy them, happened in the hallway. We had a gallery wall leading to the kitchen, a collection of framed photographs spanning 4 decades. There were pictures of Jason's first steps, our trips to the Grand Canyon, Elena accepting her law degree, and candid shots of us laughing at picnics. It was the timeline of our lives that I woke up on a Saturday morning to the sound of a drill. When I stepped into the hall, the wall was bare. The photos were gone, replaced by 3 large, generic mirrors with gold frames. The box of photos was sitting by the back door, destined for the basement storage unit. The clutter was giving me anxiety, Monica explained before I could even ask, wiping drywall dust from her hands. Too many faces staring at you. It makes the hallway feel narrow. Mirrors open up the space. Besides, nobody wants to look at awkward family photos from the 90s. I looked at the box. My entire life, Elena's entire existence, was clutter to her. Jason was in the kitchen, making coffee, and I walked up to him, pointing at the mirrors. "You let her take down the picture of your mother holding you at graduation?" I asked, my voice low. Jason sighed, slamming the fridge door a little too hard. "God, Dad, why is everything a battle? We scanned them. They're on the cloud. You can look at them on your iPad whenever you want. Monica just wants the house to look nice. Why can't you just be grateful that we're here taking care of everything?" "Grateful," I repeated, tasting the word like sour milk. "Yes. Of course. I should be grateful." I picked up the box of photos silently and carried it to my small room, sliding it under the bed next to the safe. They thought they were erasing Elena, scrubbing her from the walls and the floors until the house forgot she ever existed. But they didn't understand the physics of memory or the mechanics of a contract. Every item they removed, every wall they painted, and every photo they displaced was a violation of the status quo clause in a trust. They were literally decorating their own eviction. I sat on my bed, pulled out the ledger where I was documenting every change, and wrote down, Item 43, removal of family gallery. Replaced with mirrors. Date, October 12th. Did I close the book and smiled at the blank, gray wall across from me. Let them have their beige walls and their stiff furniture. Let them think they had successfully colonized the past. They were so busy looking in their new mirrors that they didn't see the reflection of the man standing behind them, holding the match that would burn it all down. The transformation of my home from a sanctuary of memory into a sterile display case culminated 2 weeks later, on a Friday evening that Monica had been stressing about for days. She was hosting a dinner party for her parents and her younger sister, a celebration of Jason's recent promotion, a promotion that I happened to know was merely a lateral move with a negligible raise, but one that Monica was spinning as an ascension to executive power. The house smelled of roasting lamb and expensive wine, scents that usually signaled warmth and gathering. But tonight they felt like the atmosphere of an exclusive club where I was not a member. I had spent the afternoon in my small room, listening to the chaotic preparations through the thin walls, hearing Monica bark orders at Jason to polish the silverware, my mother's silverware, and arrange the fresh flowers she had bought with the credit card I still paid off every month. Around 6 o'clock, I decided to make an effort. I wasn't going to let them erase me completely, so I showered, shaved, and put on the tweed jacket Elena had bought me for our 40th anniversary. It was a handsome coat, tailored and dignified, and wearing it made me feel like the man I used to be before I became a guest in my own life. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that if I looked the part of the patriarch, they might treat me with a shred of the respect that title commanded. That I walked out of the guest room and down the hallway, the sound of my cane tapping softly against the hardwood. The dining room looked like a page out of a catalog. The table was set for 6, adorned with the crystal glasses I had received as a wedding gift and the linen napkins Elena had embroidered by hand. Monica was lighting the taper candles, looking radiant in a silk dress that likely cost more than my monthly pension check. When she turned and saw me, her smile didn't just fade, it evaporated, replaced by a look of genuine confusion and mild irritation, as if a stray dog had wandered into a sterile operating room. "Thomas?" she asked, blowing out the match and tossing it onto a small tray. What are you doing? Why are you dressed up? I thought I would join you, I said, my voice steady, though my grip on the cane tightened. It's a family dinner, isn't it? I haven't seen your parents in years. I'd like to say hello. Monica sighed, the kind of long, dramatic exhalation one uses when dealing with a toddler who refuses to put on their shoes. She walked over to me, placing a hand on my arm not to comfort me, but to steer me away from the table. Oh, Thomas, that's sweet, but tonight is really just for my family, she said, her voice dripping with that fake, saccharine sweetness she used to mask her cruelty. My parents haven't seen the new house yet, and we have so much to catch up on. Politics, Jason's career, things that would probably just bore you. Besides, the table is already set for 6. There's really no room. I looked at the table. It was a table that seated 10. There was ample room. I looked at Jason, who was uncorking a bottle of wine at the sideboard. He paused, looking at me, then looked at his wife, and as always, his spine dissolved. Yeah, Dad, Jason mumbled, avoiding my gaze. It's going to be a loud night. Lots of talking over each other. You know how Monica's family is. We didn't want to overwhelm you. You've been looking so tired lately. I am not tired, I said, feeling the heat rise in my cheeks. And I am perfectly capable of conversation. Of course you are, Monica said, cutting me off and guiding me firmly toward the kitchen. But we want you to be comfortable. Tell you what, I've plated up a lovely portion of the lamb for you. You can eat in the kitchen, or take it to your room and watch your shows. It will be like a nice, quiet night in for you. Doesn't that sound better? She didn't wait for an answer. She walked me into the kitchen, where a lonely plate sat on the granite island, not the main course, but the trimmings. A slice of meat, some potatoes, no garnish. It looked like a meal prepared for a servant who was expected to eat quickly and disappear. Enjoy, Thomas, she said, patting my shoulder before turning back to the dining room. And please, if you need anything, just wait until we're done. We really want to make a good impression tonight. She closed the swinging door, leaving me standing in the bright, harsh light of the kitchen, holding my cane in one hand and staring at the plate of food that symbolized my new status. I didn't eat. I couldn't. Instead, I turned off the kitchen lights so my shadow wouldn't be visible under the door, and I pulled up a stool to the small pass-through window that looked into the dining room. It was slightly ajar, just enough to hear everything that I sat there in the dark, listening as Monica's parents arrived. I heard the laughter, the clinking of glasses, the compliments on the house. Oh, Monica, it's stunning, her mother gushed. The gray walls are so chic. Much better than that awful yellow you told me about. And this open concept, it flows so well. We've been working hard on it, Monica replied, accepting the praise as if she had laid the bricks herself. It's been a project, getting it out of the dark ages. And what about, you know? Her father's voice was lower, conspiratorial. Is he still around? Oh, Thomas. Yes, Monica said, her tone dismissive, as if discussing a termite problem they were managing. He's in the back room. We try to keep him comfortable, but honestly, he's fading fast. He sleeps most of the day. Jason and I are basically running the entire estate now. It's a lot of responsibility for you too, her mother added sympathetically. Taking on a caretaker role like that. It is, Jason said, and hearing his voice caused a physical pain in my chest. But someone has to do it. The house was falling apart. He doesn't know what he's doing anymore. It's better this way. He's just the caretaker of his own things now, really. We're the ones making the decisions. He's just the caretaker. The phrase hung in the air, drifting through the crack in the door and settling into my bones. They didn't see me as a father, or a provider, or the owner. To them, I was a temporary squatter, a senile old man who was merely keeping the seat warm until I had the decency to die. That I reached into my pocket and pulled out my small digital recorder, a device I had started carrying days ago on Mr. Henderson's advice. I pressed the stop button. I had captured it all. The exclusion, the mockery, the admission that they were making decisions about my assets without my consent. That I looked down at my tweed jacket, the one Elena loved. I brushed a speck of dust from the sleeve. They thought I was in the back room, eating their scraps and fading away. They were wrong. I stood up, left the plate of cold lamb untouched on the counter, and walked silently back to my room. I didn't need their dinner. I had something much more satisfying. I had the evidence that would strip the roof from over their heads. The next morning, I left the house before the sun had fully risen, slipping out the back door while the owners were still sleeping off their wine and self-satisfaction. I drove my old sedan, the one Monica had been nagging me to sell because it leaked oil on the driveway, across town to the brick building that housed Henderson and Associates. The office smelled of beeswax, old paper, and stability, scents that had been scrubbed from my own home, and as I sat in the leather chair opposite Arthur Henderson, I felt my shoulders drop for the first time in months. Arthur was a man of few words and sharp instincts, a contemporary of Elena's who had respected her legal mind as much as he admired her character. He listened in silence as I recounted the last 3 months, his face an impassive mask until I placed my phone on his desk. I played the recording of the dinner party, the hollow sound of Jason calling me a caretaker echoing in the quiet office. Then, I swiped to the photo of the art studio, the image of Elena's watercolor crumpled in the black trash bag. Arthur picked up the phone, adjusting his glasses. He looked at the photo for a long time, his jaw tightening, before he set the device down with a deliberate, heavy thud. "She knew," Arthur said softly, leaning back in his chair and looking at the portrait of Elena that hung on his wall, a testament to their long partnership. "She knew this would happen, Thomas. You know that, don't you?" "I thought she was just being cautious," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "She told me the trust was a formality. A way to avoid probate taxes." "It was a shield," Arthur corrected, opening the thick file on his desk. "Elena drafted the Harmony Trust specifically to protect you from your own generosity. She knew you would give Jason the shirt off your back if he asked for it. She also knew that Monica would eventually ask for your skin." He spun the file around so I could read the highlighted sections. The legal language was dense, but the intent was crystal clear. The house did not belong to me, nor did it belong to Jason. It belonged to the trust. I was the primary beneficiary with a life estate, meaning I had the absolute right to live there until my death. Jason and his family were classified as at-will tenants, a status that could be revoked instantly upon the violation of specific clauses. "Here is the trigger," Arthur said, pointing to Clause 7B, the same one I had read in my closet. "The deliberate destruction, alteration, or disrespect of the memorial wing, defined as the art studio, constitutes a hostile act against the trust." And here, he pointed to a subsection I hadn't noticed before: any verbal or written declaration by the tenants that implies ownership or attempts to marginalize the grantor triggers an immediate termination of the tenancy agreement. "They called me the caretaker," I said, the realization washing over me. "They claimed they were running the estate." "Exactly," Arthur said, a grim smile touching his lips. "By claiming ownership they didn't have, and by destroying the property they don't own, they have effectively evicted themselves." The trust is self-executing in this regard. We don't need a judge. We just need a sheriff to enforce the existing contract. He reached for his phone and dialed a number, his eyes never leaving mine. I'm calling the sheriff's department to schedule a civil standby for tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. I'll also have the locksmiths on standby. We are going to serve them with an immediate vacate order. Assets frozen, keys returned, access denied. Tomorrow. I asked, a sudden wave of nerves hitting me. So soon? Why wait? Arthur asked, his voice hardening. They didn't wait to throw Elena's painting in the trash, Thomas. They didn't wait to move you into the guest room. If we wait, they might tear down more walls. They might sell more furniture. This stops now. He slid a document across the desk for me to sign, the formal activation of the eviction protocol. As I picked up the pen, I thought of Jason. I thought of the little boy I had carried on my shoulders. But then I thought of the man who stood by while his wife erased his mother. I thought of the caretaker comment. I realized that the son I loved was gone, replaced by a stranger who viewed me as an obstacle to his inheritance that I signed the paper. The ink looked dark and permanent against the white page. Go home, Thomas, Arthur said gently, taking the file back. Cook yourself a nice dinner. Say nothing. Let them sleep. Tomorrow, we take your house back. I walked out of the office into the bright sunlight, feeling a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness, exactly. It was the cold, hard clarity of justice. I had the guardian ghost in my corner, and for the first time in months, I wasn't just a quiet survivor. I was the storm that was about to make landfall. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was glowing with warmth, light spilling from every window as if a celebration were taking place inside. It was a beautiful sight, the kind of architectural harmony I had strived for when I designed the place 30 years ago, but as I turned off the engine, I felt a detached sort of pity for the people inside. They were living in a fool's paradise, sipping wine and watching television in a home that had already legally rejected them, unaware that the clock on their tenancy had less than 12 hours remaining. That I entered through the garage, carrying a grocery bag containing a ribeye steak, a bottle of good red wine, and fresh rosemary, ingredients for a meal I hadn't cooked since Elena passed. The kitchen was a disaster zone of takeout containers and dirty wine glasses from the previous night's party, a mess they had clearly left for the caretaker to address. Monica was sitting at the island, scrolling through her phone, while Jason was in the living room, laughing loudly at a comedy special. When Monica saw me, she didn't look up from her screen, but her posture stiffened slightly. "You were gone a long time, Thomas," she said, her tone implying that my absence was an inconvenience to her schedule. "We ordered sushi. There's none left, but I think there's some of that lamb from last night if you want to microwave it." "That won't be necessary," I said, setting my grocery bag on the counter and removing the steak. "I'm making my own dinner tonight." She finally looked up, eyeing the thick cut of meat with a mixture of surprise and distaste. "Steak? Isn't that a bit heavy for your digestion? And please, if you're going to cook, turn on the fan. I don't want the smell of grease settling into the new curtains." "I'll be careful," I replied, my voice steady and light. I moved around the kitchen with a rhythm I thought I had lost, chopping the herbs, crushing the garlic, and searing the meat in the cast-iron skillet I had rescued from the donation pile last week. The aroma of butter and rosemary soon filled the air, a rich, savory scent that overpowered the stale smell of soy sauce and neglect. Jason wandered in, drawn by the smell, sniffing the air like a hound. He leaned against the doorframe, holding a beer, watching me with a puzzled expression. "Wow, Dad. You haven't cooked like that in years. What's the occasion? I flicked the steak, watching the butter froth, and smiled without looking at him. No occasion, Jason. I just realized that I've been living too small lately. It's time I started taking care of myself again. Jason chuckled, exchanging a look with Monica that screamed, "Look at the old man trying to be independent." "Well, good for you," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's good to see you finally accepting things. You know, settling into your rhythm. We were actually talking about that today. Once the playroom is finished, maybe we can look into getting you a small TV for your room. That way you don't have to be bored when we have guests." It was a crumb of kindness thrown to a beggar, a reward for my perceived submission. They truly believed I had accepted my fate as the silent lodger in the back room. They interpreted my calmness as defeat, never suspecting that it was actually the serenity of a man holding a royal flesh. "That sounds thoughtful," I said, plating the steak and pouring a generous glass of the Cabernet I had bought. "But don't worry about the room. I have a feeling my living arrangements are going to change very soon." Monica smirked, clearly thinking I meant moving into a nursing home. "Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves, Thomas. One step at a time. Just try not to leave a mess in the sink, okay? The cleaning lady isn't coming until Tuesday." "I promise," I said, "the kitchen will be spotless." I took my plate and my wine, not to the dining room. I didn't want to share that space with them tonight, but to the small patio out back. I sat in the cool evening air, eating the best meal I had tasted in months, looking through the sliding glass doors at the two of them. They were arguing over something trivial now, probably which show to watch next or whose turn it was to refill the wine. They looked so comfortable, so assured of their dominance that I finished my wine, washed my plate as promised, and walked past them one last time to reach my room. "Good night, Thomas," Jason called out, not looking away from the TV. "Good night, Jason," I replied softly. "Sleep well." I went into the guest room and locked the door. I didn't get into bed immediately. Instead, I pulled my suitcase from the top of the closet. I packed a small bag, not for me, but to organize the documents I would need in the morning. I laid out the trust deed, the eviction notice Arthur had prepared, and the photos of the destroyed studio. I placed them neatly on the small desk, aligned with the precision of the architect I once was. Lying in the dark, I listened to the house settle. I heard them go upstairs to the master bedroom, my bedroom. I heard the floorboards creak overhead. Usually, that sound filled me with resentment, but tonight, it just sounded like the ticking of a clock. I closed my eyes and whispered a thank you to Elena. She had built the ark, and tomorrow, the flood was coming. The morning sun hadn't yet crested the horizon when I sat in the living room, fully dressed in my charcoal suit, watching the digital clock on the mantel tick toward the inevitable. I had been up since 5, shaving with a steady hand and tying my tie with the precision of a man preparing for a funeral, though in reality, I was preparing for a resurrection. The house was silent, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the rhythmic breathing of the structure itself, unaware that it was about to be purged of the infection that had taken root in its master bedroom. At exactly 6:59 a.m., I stood up, brushed a piece of lint from my lapel, and walked to the front door. I didn't wait for the bell to ring. As the second hand hit the 12, I opened the heavy oak door to reveal Arthur Henderson standing on the porch, flanked by Sheriff Miller, a man I had known since high school, and a locksmith in blue coveralls who looked ready to work. "Good morning, Thomas," Arthur said, his voice low and grave, carrying a briefcase that contained the weight of my late wife's foresight. "Are we ready to proceed?" "We are," I replied, stepping aside to let them in. "They are still sleeping." The heavy tread of boots in the foyer was a sound that commanded attention, and it didn't take long for the disturbance to register upstairs. I heard the muffled thud of footsteps, followed by the confused, irritated voice of Monica calling out from the landing. "Thomas? What on earth are you doing? It's 7 in the morning." Her voice was thick with sleep and annoyance, the tone of a woman who was used to dictating the schedule of everyone around her. "If you're making noise in the kitchen again, I swear." She stopped abruptly as she reached the bottom of the stairs, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. There I stood, flanked by a uniformed sheriff and a lawyer in a three-piece suit, while a stranger with a tool belt was already inspecting the deadbolt on the front door. Jason stumbled down behind her, rubbing his eyes, wearing only his boxers and a t-shirt, looking like a confused child rather than the man of the house he claimed to be. "Dad?" Jason stammered, his gaze darting between the gun on the sheriff's hip and the grim expression on Arthur's face. "What's going on? Is everything okay?" "Everything is exactly as it should be, Jason," I said, my voice calm, devoid of the trembling that had plagued me for months. "Please, come into the living room. Arthur has some papers to read to you." "Papers?" Monica snapped, her confusion quickly hardening into defensive anger as she pulled her silk robe tighter around herself. "Who are these people? You can't just bring strangers into our house at dawn, Thomas. This is private property." "That is precisely what we are here to discuss," Arthur said, stepping forward and placing his briefcase on the coffee table, the one Monica had claimed was too expensive for me to put my feet on. He clicked the latches open, the sound sharp and final. "Mrs. Miller, Mr. Miller, please sit down." "I'm not sitting down until you tell me who you are," Monica spat, crossing her arms. "I'm calling the police." "I am the police, ma'am," Sheriff Miller said, his voice deep and bored, the voice of a man who had seen enough domestic disputes to know exactly how this one ended. "And I'm here to ensure the peace is kept while Mr. Henderson executes a civil eviction order. I suggest you listen." The word eviction hung in the air like a noxious gas. Jason's face went pale, draining of color instantly, while Monica let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Eviction? You can't evict us," she scoffed, looking at me with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Thomas, did you put them up to this? Is this about the studio? God, you are so dramatic. We own this house, you senile old fool. Jason is the heir. You're just living here because we let you." Arthur didn't look up as he pulled a document from the file. He simply adjusted his glasses and began to read, his voice clear and monotone. "According to the terms of the Harmony Trust, established by the late Elena Miller, the property located at 44 Oak Lane is held in trust for the sole benefit of the grantor, Thomas Miller, for the duration of his natural life. Jason and Monica Miller are classified as at-will tenants, subject to the good faith clause of the residency agreement." Arthur paused, looking over his spectacles at Monica, whose smirk was beginning to falter. Clause 7b specifically states that any intentional destruction of the property's legacy features, specifically the art studio, triggers an immediate revocation of tenancy. Furthermore, Clause 9c states that any attempt by the tenants to claim ownership, marginalize the grantor, or cause undue emotional distress results in an immediate freeze of all trust-allocated assets and an expedited removal from the premises. He pulled out a glossy 8x10 photograph, the picture I had taken yesterday of the painting in the trash, and slid it across the table. Next to it, he placed a transcript of the recording from last night's dinner. At 6:42 p.m. last night, Arthur continued, Mr. Jason Miller was recorded stating that his father was just the caretaker and that he and his wife were running the estate. This statement, combined with the destruction of the studio wall documented here, constitutes a hostile breach of trust. As of 7:01 a.m. today, your right to reside here has been terminated. This is bullshit. Jason shouted, finally finding his voice, though it cracked with panic. You can't do this. Mom wouldn't have done this. Your mother, I interrupted, speaking for the first time since they entered the room, knew exactly who you were, Jason. She hoped you would be better. She hoped you would stand up for me. But she prepared for the possibility that you wouldn't. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the stranger he had become. You threw her painting in the garbage, Jason. You let your wife treat me like a servant in the house I built. And you called me a caretaker. I didn't mean it like that, Jason stammered, stepping toward me, but the sheriff took a subtle step forward, blocking his path. Save it, Monica hissed, her eyes narrowing as she calculated her next move. Fine. If you want to play games, Thomas, we'll leave. But don't expect to see your grandkids. And don't expect us to pay for your nursing home when you finally crack up completely. Come on, Jason. Let's go to a hotel. We'll fight this in court. She turned to storm up the stairs, but Arthur cleared his throat one last time. I'm afraid there's one more thing, he said. The credit cards you are using, the vehicle leases for the BMW and the SUV, and the joint bank account you use for household expenses, those are all underwritten by the trust. Since the trust has been breached, those assets have been frozen effective immediately. Monica froze, her hand on the banister. She pulled her phone from her pocket, frantically tapping the screen. I watched as she opened her banking app, her face turning a shade of gray that matched the walls she had painted. Declined, she whispered, staring at the screen. Zero balance. That's illegal. You can't cut us off. The car keys, please, Arthur said, holding out his hand. The leasing company is sending a tow truck to collect them within the hour. You are welcome to pack your personal effects, clothing and toiletries only. Furniture, electronics, and appliances purchased with trust funds remain the property of the trust. You're leaving us with nothing. Jason whispered, tears finally welling in his eyes as the reality crashed down on him. Dad, please. We have nowhere to go. I looked at my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man who had watched his wife destroy my memories without blinking. I felt a pang of sorrow, sharp and deep, but it was quickly cauterized by the memory of the caretaker comment. You have each other, I said softly. And you have your modern perspective. I suggest you use it to find an apartment you can afford. You have 30 minutes to pack. Sheriff Miller will supervise. I turned my back on them and walked toward the kitchen to pour another cup of coffee. Behind me, the sound of the locksmith's drill cut through the air, screaming into the wood of the front door, drowning out the sound of Monica's sobbing. The eviction wasn't just legal, it was absolute. They were being surgically removed from the life they thought they had stolen. The 30 minutes that followed were a blur of frantic motion and chaotic noise, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity the house had maintained for decades. I sat in the living room, sipping the coffee that had finally cooled enough to drink, watching the sheriff stand by the front door with his arms crossed, a silent sentinel ensuring the transition of power was absolute. Upstairs, I could hear the aggressive zip of suitcases, the thud of heavy items being dropped, and the frantic, hushed arguments between Jason and Monica, the sound of rats realizing the ship wasn't just sinking, but that they had been the ones to chew through the hull. When they finally descended the stairs, they looked like refugees from a life of luxury they had never actually earned. Monica was dragging 2 large Louis Vuitton suitcases, purchased, I knew, with the very allowance I had just severed, her face a mask of smeared mascara and pure, unadulterated venom. Jason followed, carrying a laundry basket filled with hastily grabbed clothes and a box of electronics, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading. They stopped in a foyer, the reality of the open front door and the waiting locksmith hitting them like a physical barrier. Jason dropped the basket, the plastic clattering loudly on the marble, and walked toward me, disregarding the sheriff's warning step forward. "Dad, please," he said, his voice cracking, shedding the arrogance of the homeowner he had pretended to be just yesterday. "You can't do this. We have nowhere to go. The accounts are frozen. We don't even have gas money to get to a hotel. You're destroying your own family over a wall. Over a painting." I set my coffee cup down on the coaster, a small act of preservation that felt significant. I looked at my son, and for a fleeting moment, I wanted to reach into my pocket and give him cash, to fix it like I had fixed his scraped knees and his broken toys and his credit card debt in college. But then I looked at the empty space where the gallery wall used to be, and I remembered the caretaker comment. The bank of trust was closed. "I am not destroying this family, Jason," I said gently. "You destroyed it the moment you decided I was an obstacle instead of a father. And as for the wall, it was never just a wall." I reached into the inside pocket of my suit jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. The paper was cream-colored, heavy, and smelled faintly of the lavender sachets Elena used to keep in her desk. I held it out to him. "What is this?" Jason asked, taking it with trembling hands. "A letter from your mother," I replied. "She wrote it 3 years ago, the day she signed the trust. She instructed Mr. Henderson to give it to you only under one specific condition, if Clause 9C was ever activated. If you were being evicted for cruelty." Jason stared at the envelope, his name written in Elena's elegant, looping script. He tore it open, his hands shaking so badly the paper rattled. Monica leaned in, reading over his shoulder, her eyes darting across the page as they absorbed the message from the grave. "My dearest Jason," he read aloud, his voice barely a whisper. "If you are reading this, it means my worst fears have come true. It means that you allowed your ambition, or perhaps your wife's ambition, to overshadow your heart. I loved you more than life itself, but I knew you were pliable. I knew that without me there to anchor you, you might drift. I created this trust not to punish you, but to protect your father. He is a man of infinite patience and kindness, and I knew he would never stop you from taking everything he has. So, I had to stop you for him." Jason stopped reading, a sob catching in his throat. Monica snatched the letter from him, scanning the bottom of the page, searching for a loophole, a number, a way out. "It says here." Monica's voice was shrill, desperate. "It says the house goes to the Elena Miller Arts Foundation." "What does that mean?" "Jason is the heir. He gets the house when Thomas dies." Arthur Henderson stepped forward then, his voice cutting through. Her panic like a gavel. "Incorrect, Mrs. Miller. That was the assumption you made, but it was never the reality. The trust stipulates that if the tenancy is revoked due to hostile breach, Jason is disinherited from the real estate assets entirely. Upon Thomas's passing, the property will be liquidated, and the proceeds will endow a scholarship for underprivileged art students. You were never waiting for an inheritance. You were waiting for a donation to charity." The silence that followed was absolute. The color drained from Monica's face until she looked like a statue of shock. All the months of enduring my presence, all the modernizing, all the scheming, it had all been for nothing. They had been playing a game where the winning move was kindness, and they had cheated at every turn. "You knew," Jason whispered, looking at me with a look of betrayal that mirrored my own. "You knew the whole time that we wouldn't get the house." "No," I said, standing up and leaning on my cane. "I didn't know. I found out yesterday when I read the clause. I hoped, until the very last second, that you would prove your mother wrong. I hoped you would defend my home. I hoped you would treat me with dignity. If you had, this house would have been yours forever. You disinherited yourself, Jason. All you had to do was be a good son." "Time to go, folks," Sheriff Miller said, opening the door wider, letting the morning chill sweep into the hallway. "The locksmith needs to work." Monica grabbed her suitcases, shooting me one last look of pure hatred, a look that confirmed she had never loved anything about this family except its checkbook. She marched out without a word. Jason lingered for a second, looking at me, then at the letter in his hand. He looked like he wanted to hug me, or hit me, or fall to his knees. But he did none of those things. He simply turned, shoulders slumped under the weight of his choices, and walked out into the cold that I watched them load their car. I watched the tow truck pull up to take the leased SUV. I watched them drive away in a cloud of exhaust. And then, I closed the door. The sound of the latch clicking into place was the loudest sound I had heard in months. It was the sound of a chapter ending. I turned back to the empty foyer. The house was quiet, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel empty. It felt cleansed. I walked to the living room, sat in my new, uncomfortable chair, and looked at the ceiling. "You were right, Elena," I whispered to the empty room. "You were right." It took 3 weeks to repair the physical damage to the sunroom, a task I undertook myself not because I couldn't afford a contractor, but because I needed to reclaim the space with my own hands. I spent my mornings sanding down the fresh drywall compound, the rhythmic shush-shush sound replacing the chaotic noise of demolition that had filled the house for months. I repainted the walls in the original, sunbeam yellow, that Elena had chosen 20 years ago, watching as the room transformed from a gray, hollow shell back into a vessel of light and warmth. The furniture I had been forced to banish to the garage was brought back in, piece by heavy piece. My leather armchair returned to its rightful spot in the living room, smelling faintly of motor oil and resilience, and the family photos, the ones that hadn't been scanned or thrown away, went back up on the wall. But I didn't put everything back exactly as it was. I left the guest room empty, stripping the bed and turning it into a library, a clear signal to myself and the universe that this house was no longer a boarding facility for ungrateful guests. The final step of the restoration involved the watercolor painting. I had retrieved it from the trash bag that morning, smoothing out the heavy paper on the kitchen island. The damage was visible. A sharp crease ran through the painted coastline, and the corner was dog-eared where it had been jammed against a soup can. A professional restorer might have been able to flatten it, to hide the scars of its mistreatment, but I decided against it. That I went to my workshop and built a frame out of reclaimed walnut, deep and sturdy. I mounted the painting exactly as it was, wrinkles and all, and hung it in the center of the newly restored studio. The crease didn't ruin the image, it told the story of its survival. It was no longer just a painting of a beach, it was a testament to the fact that beauty can endure violence and come out the other side, perhaps a little battered, but still whole. That evening, as the sun set and filled the room with a golden glow, I sat on Elena's stool and opened the second envelope Arthur had given me. It was smaller than the one for Jason, sealed with blue wax. "My darling Thomas," she had written, her handwriting a little shakier here, likely written on a bad day. "If you are reading this, it means the hard part is over. It means you had to do something that broke your heart to save your soul. I know you, Thomas. I know you are sitting there feeling guilty, wondering if you were too harsh, wondering if you failed as a father because our son lost his way. You didn't fail. You loved him enough to let him face the consequences of his own character. That is the hardest kind of love there is. I wiped a tear from my cheek, the paper trembling in my hand. Do not let this house become a mausoleum. I built the trust to protect you, not to trap you. Paint the walls whatever color you want. Plant new flowers. Live, Thomas. You are the architect. You've spent so long building foundations for everyone else. It's time to build a life just for you. I love you, across all time and space. E. I folded the letter and placed it in my pocket, right next to my heart. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the last few months. It was a peaceful silence, the kind that exists after a storm has passed and the air is scrubbed clean. That I walked to the window and looked out at the garden. The weeds had grown tall during the occupation, choking out the roses, but I could see the buds pushing through, stubborn and alive. I wasn't just a caretaker anymore. I was the owner. I was the survivor. And as I turned off the light and walked toward the master bedroom, my bedroom, I knew that while the house was empty of people, it was finally, truly full. The quiet victory of Thomas Miller wasn't one with shouting matches or physical force. It was one with a signature on a piece of paper and the unshakable foresight of a woman who knew that true love sometimes means preparing for the worst so your partner can experience the best. Elena didn't leave that trust to control Thomas from the grave. She left it to ensure that his kindness would never become his cage. She understood that there is a profound difference between being a family member and being a casualty of someone else's ambition. Thomas's journey reminds us of a hard truth that many of us face as we get older. Sometimes, the people we raised, the people we sacrificed for, can become strangers who view our lives not as a legacy to be honored, but as a resource to be consumed. But as Thomas showed us, age does not equate to weakness, and silence should never be mistaken for submission. Being a quiet survivor doesn't mean you simply endure the storm. It means you know exactly when to close the shutters and lock the door. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like a guest in your own life or had your kindness exploited by those who should have protected you, please know that you are not alone. There is immense power in drawing a line in the sand. There is dignity in saying no. And there is absolutely no shame in protecting your peace, even if it means closing the door on family. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to be the villain in someone else's story just to survive in your own? Did you have a guardian ghost like Elena who looked out for you when you couldn't look out for yourself? Your stories are the heartbeat of this channel, and sharing them might just give someone else the courage to pick up their own pen and rewrite their ending. Please like this video if you believe in justice, and subscribe to Silent Revenge Stories for more tales of resilience, hidden strength, and the people who refuse to be broken. Until next time, remember, the foundation of your life belongs to you. Don't let anyone else hold the blueprints.